Well, we've left the retail part of the operation and we're now getting ready to walk through and look at the wholesale operation. As I mentioned, wholesalers deal directly, they sell to the retailer. They're not going to sell to the general public. They're going to sell to the retailer, where the operation we just visited. They also are going to sell directly to the landscaper or landscape maintenance firm, anyone who can buy plants in large quantities or in bulk. So we're outside the office of Black Olive East, which is the wholesale operation that supplies the plants that we saw in the Living Color retail. Living Color is the retail operation. Black Olive East is the wholesale operation. This is where they're producing the plants. Again, they also have the art of display. Their front office is very inviting. So when you go in, there's probably all sorts of papers and things going on inside. But again, it's showing a wholesaler or a landscaper, hey, I get an idea of how I can use some of these plants. That's kind of a neat idea. Hey, I can go over and get some of those statues over next door at the retail operation. We have a variety of ways of growing plants in Florida, and we're going to see some of these structures. We can grow plants outside in full sun. We're using overhead irrigation. These are plants that can tolerate full sun, and we're going to water them overhead or with drip emitters. We also can grow plants in shade structures that we see across the way and we'll walk into, as well as we walk down toward the end, we'll see a greenhouse structure. So those are our three basic ways of growing plants in Florida. Outside in full sun, in shade cloth or shade structures, and then in greenhouse structures. One thing to note, and what makes this retail or this wholesale operation excellent, you're going to notice that one, the plants are spaced to give enough room for them to grow. We also notice that there are no weeds in the container. The plants are properly pruned and maintained. No insects, no disease, no weeds on the ground. Walkways are kept clean and swept clean. These are all good signs of a well-maintained, well-run nursery.
Oh, check this out, Dr. Moore.
Oh, well, what is that, Daniela?
Well, I think there are the dates that they check for maintenance, the plants.
Maintenance?
Maintenance, and when they use the fertilizer too.
Absolutely, because we see here we have 6208, 63008, 731, 9808, and it gives us, there's a number right next to it, 745, 1005, 100305. So it could be the fertilizer or a code for the maintenance. Excellent way of showing what's being done, so there's no questions. You don't have to go inside and check a logbook. They know that everything in this group was treated on this day, and the last day it was treated with anything was 9808, and whatever this code is, whether it's a fertilizer or something else that was done to it at the time. Could have been pruning or something like that. So some nurseries use codes, other nurseries use letters. So way of communicating. Key is when you do things like this is that everyone who works at the nursery has to know the code. So you get a code book. So if we were to use a code book and I said 151, you'd know what that code meant. I'm making something up, so all right. But excellent, good catch. Okay, we're moving into a shade house. When I mentioned shade houses, we have different light levels that we can use. So this is probably a 70% shade. It means it's letting 30% of the light comes through, versus other shade houses which may only be 30%. That means 70% of the light comes through. Wanted to point out that benches don't have to be fancy to be functional. Right? There's nothing wrong with growing on the ground, but sometimes we need a bench to get the plants off the ground. So this is just a plain old wooden frame with a wire mesh, a very strong wire mesh that's not going to bend, not going to break, will support the weight of the plant. So benches don't have to be fancy to be functional, depending on whether you need to have the plants off the ground or whether you're going to leave large containers. So something like this is a fairly large container. It's not going to fit on a bench. We're also maximizing space by using metal rods and hanging things above. One thing to note, we're in a shade house, so it's not as big a deal. But what happens, Daniela, to the plants that are going underneath hanging baskets? What happens to the light level?
It's lower.
It's lower. Why would it be lower?
Because they're underneath it.
They're underneath plants. So when you maximize space and use overhead baskets, sometimes you reduce quality, or you have to think about the plants that are growing underneath, because they're not going, whatever's inside this pot's going to drip on them, as well as changes the light level. Same thing when we're talking about beams, running beams across. Now we don't have a lot of shading from the support structures in the shade house, but if you had large beams running across, it could interfere with light levels. Again, most of these plants are being sold to a landscaper for landscape purposes. They're not being sold to the general public. So we're going to see we're not going to see a lot of annuals and perennials in here. We're going to see some of our larger trees and shrubs, plants that we would use in mass quantities in a landscape or re-landscaping. Great. Why do you like this, Lucy?
Well, it maximizes space.
How?
And the spacing, it's perfect spacing. I mean, you know exactly, like, you don't really have to think about
where to
spaced apart. And, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, listening. I'm listening.
You know exactly that your spacing is already set out for you. You're just putting the pots right where they need to go, and you're getting more use out of this small space right
And
here.
they're not shading.
They're not.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're not shading anything underneath. We're using a wasted space. We're using a vertical. This is vertical,
yeah,
versus horizontal space. We're not taking up floor space for containers. We're not taking up bench space. The other thing I noted is that, have you noticed that it whirls? So they're not directly above or below one another. It whirls. So we have a plant here, and then it whirls here, and then this one's, you know, there's another whirl. So they whirl around and all the way up, so that we don't have plants growing right on top of each other. But we got a nice row right here, and a nice row right here, and a nice row right here. So innovation in design makes this nursery very successful, because this is not something someone's making. Someone said, there's got to be a better way. I can take some wire, I can take some pipe, I can figure out how to do this. And this is a fairly simple technique to maximize space, but an excellent example. We also, you notice in here, just like we saw in the retail operation, because they do sell to landscapers, they do have signs out here to help the landscapers know what they're buying, so they can buy in bulk. Again, signage helps, as well as helps the employees.
Good.
All right. One problem when we use overhead irrigation. Now, it's a very effective way to irrigate plants in a greenhouse or a shade structure like this, is because we have a lot of plants and they have similar water demands. But when we start running long pieces of pipe up out of the ground, this PVC pipe tends to flap when you get a lot of pressure. So the pipe is moving around like this, flapping in the wind. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
You like the way I flap? I flap in the wind. So we're going to support it with a metal stake. Again, it doesn't have to, and a zip tie. Again, to keep this pole from rocking when the irrigation kicks on. And I imagine this is a simple spinner head, so it's going to spin around and it's going to water the plants in this area. Problem is that it waters probably the plants closest to it. We have to have another irrigation head, so we want an overlap of irrigation in the nursery. So we don't want the plants in the middle being dry, so they have to be spaced properly so we get an overlap. The only bad thing is that you'll get the sidewalk wet. But you notice that they've done a really good job of keeping the slime off the sidewalk, and it doesn't look like they get too much water out into the middle, probably only about out to here, which has that means that this is an effective head with an effective radius. And of course, we have our old standby. When that doesn't work, we pick up a hose and water by hand, because there are those certain plants that need a little extra water or need an extra drink. So you always have a hose, but again, not in the way, off to the side, safety. I've been noticing also throughout the nursery that they have certain plants tagged with colors. Either that's indicating that these have been sold, and they've tied them off. I don't see a sign that says sold, but I've noticed that in certain other areas they've flagged them. So again, different colors, different ways to alert the people working in this nursery. Oh, these are not for sale, these need a certain treatment, or we noted a problem on it, so we're going to flag it. But I haven't noticed any insects or disease problems. These are very healthy, lush plants with deep root systems, so they're obviously doing something right. Let's just take a moment to talk about the growing media. So what can you guys see in this pot? Looking at the media, what types of components do you see in here?
Perlite.
Bark, perlite.
Probably some peat.
Could be some peat.
Looks like a little bit of that. I don't see any vermiculite.
Nope, no vermiculite. And this isn't really perlite. You know what this is? This is styrofoam. Styrofoam is it can be a cheaper alternative to perlite. One problem with styrofoam is that because it's so light, it does basically what perlite would do, but it tends to blow away. And again, I see the bark, and it's probably a bark styrofoam, or could have been perlite peat mix. Normally, your growing mixes are going to be a combination of 3 components. So depending on what you're growing, when we're talking about ornamentals, like what we see at this nursery, large ornamentals, they tend to go with a bark media and a bark peat media with either perlite or vermiculite. If we're talking about annuals or perennials, it tends to be a very heavy peat vermiculite, and it tends to be a little different. But for a croton like this is an excellent media. We want the bark, but very moist, holds water well, and the plants look very healthy. These actually look like new plants, like they've just been bumped up into these containers. So they're probably letting them grow up a little bit bigger before they move them over to the retail environment or sell them to a landscaper. Again, we see those same tags with dates and either a code or fertilizer. They're sitting here. So what I also see here is that, again, they're really good about marketing themselves and labeling themselves, whether they're the wholesale or the retail operation. This is Black Olive East Nursery, so I know right away we're in the wholesale environment. When we were over in the other, it said Living Color. They have a great way of marketing themselves, getting their name out there, and that's important. Whether you're wholesale or retail, got to get your name out there, because you're in the business to make money. How do you make money? High quality plants, reliable, dependable service, and marketing yourself, name recognition. And I'm sure there are many, many other ways of making money, right?
Oh yeah. Gotta find that niche.
Gotta find that niche. Well, we're at another type of structure that we see. So we've been through the shade structure, we've seen the outdoor production. We do have these modified greenhouses in Florida. So really what we're looking for is, we're not gonna put up solid frame glass greenhouses, but we want to be able to control. We want to be able to control the light. What do we use a greenhouse for? What are greenhouses good for?
Temperature.
Temperature. What else? Light.
Wind or aeration.
Aeration. Can we control? Can we control water? Can we control the rainwater out there in a shade house or in a field or in an outdoor nursery?
Not as well as
we can in a greenhouse structure. That's probably, so it's called a controlled environment for a reason, because we can control all the factors that go into growing the plant. Now this looks like their propagation area. So we see that we have plastic sides that can roll down. So if it gets cold, we can block it. We also have a solid plastic roof, and in order to reduce the light level, they've put a screening up there. One thing that we fight in Florida is high light levels. So whether you're growing in a greenhouse or growing in a shade house, we got to find ways to reduce light levels, especially on cuttings and new seedlings. So these have small mist heads that are going to turn on and will mist the new cuttings. We have, again, a wire frame open underneath. We want air movement, because this is where we're misting. Oh, and we have the mist coming on. But you can see how we have a very fine mist. It's going to run periodically, probably every 2 to 5 minutes. You're going to have the mist come on for probably 30 seconds. And that's enough. We don't need sopping wet, but we have to keep the leaves moist, because these plants are going to be producing roots. So they've taken cuttings off of stock plants, probably somewhere else in the nursery. Now they're getting them to root. They're going to bump them up into larger containers and grow them up so they can either use them in the wholesale or the retail operation. If I try to pull this out, this is a well-rooted cutting. So this plant now, this is probably the holding area. We see that we have the same mist heads, so they're probably not going to sell this plant. What do you think they're going to do?
Pot it up.
Pot it up into what probably a
I would say 1 gallon.
probably a 1 gallon. This is a nice little shrub. See that root system?
Yep.
So they're probably getting ready. This is probably the holding area. They're going to probably take these. These are going to be bumped up into 1 gallon containers. So they came from the mist area over here. Again, under a clear plastic greenhouse. The sides, you notice, are open, so we have open sides to allow the air movement. If it was closed all up, we'd all be sweating buckets right now. So we have to have that air movement, and that facilitates cooling. But we want to control the water that's coming on, so we want to make sure that we do the watering, not the rain. And these guys are probably ready to bump up into a bigger container. But I'm amazed. No weeds, no debris. Cleanest greenhouse nursery I've ever seen. And we see yet another bench design. Metal posts with rings supporting a metal frame, and then they just have stretched the chain link or the mesh between poles, between ends. Again, leaves it very open underneath. We don't have that blocky wood. It makes an excellent area for growing orchids. Again, the plastic to reduce the light and to control the water, because orchids are very sensitive to overwatering, as we all are aware, or maybe not aware. But again, but open sides to take advantage of the air movement.
And they obviously have it going in the right direction.
The orientation, yes, greenhouse orientation. Thank you for pointing that out. What is the proper orientation for a greenhouse?
Oh, now you put me on the spot. No, it should be, let me think.
You want the eaves running north and south. You want the eaves so our greenhouse is running north and south. We want to take advantage of the east-west winds. We also want to take advantage of the sun. The sun rises in the east, sets in the west. If our greenhouse ends, we're running this way. So the end wall was here and the end wall was here. That's east and west. We're blocking light because we have a wall. This wall would be blocking the light. We don't have a wall. Because the sun comes up in the east, it's going to set in the west, we're going to take advantage, we're going to maximize the light level. Whereas if we had a wall, if there was a wall over here, it would block the light and we'd have huge shadow effects. So we not only take advantage of the wind, but we take advantage of the light as well by orienting our greenhouses north-south instead of east-west.
Why is like east to west greenhouse too?
Why do you have an east? Depending on where you are, you're from Ecuador, so closer to the equator, you can run them east to west. In the northern hemisphere, we run our greenhouses north and south. Well, this obviously is out for a reason, but do you guys know what type of bench this is? Lucy, you should know what type of bench this is.
Flood bench.
A flood bench. Ebb and flood. So right now, it's out back here where we have their working area, obviously, but this is a type of bench where you could use for sub-irrigation. So basically, if we didn't have this on here, if this was in production, what you would have is that the water would flood up through a valve here, flood the bench. So you would have pots sitting on the bench here, and what happens is the water floods the bench. It's not going anywhere. It's going to flood probably the bottom couple inches or just to cover the holes. We'll leave the pots in that flooded water or sit in the standing water for about 10 minutes. Capillary action in the media sucks up the water. We open the valve, the water drains away, and we haven't polluted the environment. We haven't wasted any water. The plant takes up just what it needs as a sponge and nothing else. So it's a very efficient way of watering. However, these benches are not always very efficient, and you have to have a greenhouse structure like we just walked through where you can control water. They don't work outside where you have rain, right? Because you just have standing water there in the rain. Well, it's inevitable when you run a nursery of any kind or when you're dealing with plants that you're going to have to use certain types of chemicals. And sometimes you're going to have to use pesticides, either a fungicide or an insecticide to control either insects or diseases. I wanted to point this out because they've done it very well. They have a locked storage facility that's well ventilated, and only certain people can get into it. They also have charts and signs. So whenever they're going to spray an area or use a pesticide in an area, they have to post it and say, keep out, no entry, to warn people that an area has been sprayed with pesticides. So that's real important when we're talking about worker protection safety or protecting the people who work for you, as well as protecting yourself, is you want to use chemicals wisely, but you also want to have them stored properly. And you can see that's padlocked, and there are lots of signs and labels. No one can get in there unless they have the key to that padlock. So it has to be someone who's been trained, who has a license to apply those pesticides or those products. And then once they're done, they, by law, have got to label or legally alert people that an area has been treated. So they've got their warning signs all ready to go. So, A+. Well, again, lots of different structures. Lots of different ways of running it. Obviously they're using PVC to hold the screen material up on the roof, which is very innovative. And as I walk in here, I see a couple of things. Some things would be an OSHA violation because we're not allowed to have all these extension plugs, but lights. So what are times of the year when we might need to light a crop? What types of plants need lights, guys?
Asking for actual plants.
No. Photoperiodic plants. Yes. So if we wanted to extend the daylight, extend the day length to either force something to flower or force something to stay vegetative, we would have lights. So this would be a way of having lights. We also see that we have a fan in here. Fans are very important. Now in Florida we have a natural breeze, and we've felt a lot of breezes, but sometimes when you have a greenhouse that's closed, you need fans to move the air around in the greenhouse. So again, they have a fan mounted up here, and ideally we'd like to see, oh, there's the fan on the opposite way. So the fans are facing opposite directions. That's creating a circular flow in here. That's called horizontal airflow, HAF, horizontal airflow. We want to see that horizontal airflow. So this fan blows the air that way, blows it that way. It creates a donut effect, mixes the air, and helps keep the greenhouse cool and keeps air moving.
Irrigation is kind of interesting in here too, though. They've got some coming down.
Yep, I noticed that some of the irrigation is hanging down. They have PVC, and then some of it's hanging up, and all of it is strapped to the frame. So I noticed that too. Is that this is probably one of those makeshift. I can do this, I can do that. I'm going to try this type of greenhouse. But again, maximizing space, and everything looks very healthy, well maintained. Well, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this plant, but we just noticed that this is Jatropha, and it's highly valued as an ornamental plant, but there are certain varieties of Jatropha that produce a lot of oil. So this is also one of our new biofuels that we're looking at. If we can mass produce this plant, not as an ornamental, but mass produce it and collect the oil from the seeds and fruit that can then be used to produce fuel. So this obviously is one of the ornamental plants, but we have other varieties that are not ornamental.
Butterflies.
Oh, and it attracts butterflies. There we go. Butterfly plant. I just noticed how interesting this bamboo is. You don't really see a lot of bamboo in Florida, but it's a neat landscape plant, and I'd like to see it used more often in Florida landscapes. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people know what to do with it, but this is a really nice specimen plant, and it looks like they have quite a few. I just love the sound of the rustling leaves. One thing I've been noticing when we were over at the retail operation, as well as over here, is that the plants, when they have a label on them, this obviously is going to go from the wholesale over to the retail operation. They already have a barcode on it. So they've already inventoried this plant here in the wholesale nursery, and when it goes over to the retail nursery, they'll be able to mark when it was sold and for what price, just by having a barcode. And it's simple enough to get a computer program that's going to print labels and put these barcodes on. But I've been noticing that some of them already have, well, some of these plants have come from, this plant has a tag. This obviously has come from California, from Monrovia Nurseries. I don't know if I can see it. This is a better tag here. This is from Monrovia Nurseries. So they've bought it from Monrovia, which is in California, with all the planting, again with a barcode, and here it says Monrovia, Azusa, California. But now they're going to finish it off, or going to take it and get it ready to either use in to sell to landscapers here, so they're holding it for the landscapers here, or they're going to take it over to their retail operation.
And by law, they do need to keep this tag on, right?
They do need to keep this tag on because this plant came from Monrovia. Whereas their tags look a little different, and they've created their own tags with the black olive, not with the black olive or with the Living Color label on it. I'm not sure what this is, but looking at this curled puckering leaf here, if this is not, I believe that this is what typical leaf should look like when it comes out. This puckering here indicates that it could be an insect or something in here. Normally when I see puckering like this to me screams thrips, because thrips like to get in there and chew the buds, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be something else. Now I'm looking here, I don't see any evidence of any other types of insects on here. I don't see scale, I don't see mealybugs, but that doesn't mean that they weren't on here or that this plant wasn't recently treated. But to me, that looks like you had something get in there and start chewing on that bud to create this model leaf. Don't always assume though that it's insects. What else could it be? What else could call?
Over-fertilization.
Over-fertilization, under-fertilization.
Watering.
Could be watering.
Under-overwatering.
Under-overwatering.
Sun.
Could be problem with sunlight.
Virus.
Could be a virus. So when you run a nursery, you also are a plant detective.
Yeah.
And the first thing you would start with is the species, the name of the plant. If I don't know what this plant is, how can I diagnose what's wrong with it? This may be a very common symptom of overwatering, underwatering, over-fertilization, under-fertilization. They may be very susceptible to thrips. So we're guessing right now because I don't know what this plant is and I don't see a label in the pot or on the pot. So we're guessing. But again, first problem is figure out what the plant is. Then go back to your books. Figure out what that plant needs. Once you know what the plant needs, you can better diagnose the problem and fix it. And because I don't see evidence of insects, whatever it was, obviously they've tried to correct. And it could be that this is the way the variety grows, but I doubt it. Right now in South Florida, we are coming into our prime annual season. We tend to put our bedding plants, annuals and perennials, in the ground in the wintertime. So things like impatiens, I know people go, oh no, not impatiens, oh they're overused. But you know what, they grow really well. These impatiens are going to be ready for sale, ready to go in the ground probably in a couple weeks. All right, they grow really, really fast. They're nice and healthy. They've already got flower buds. Again, they have that bark media with the styrofoam, and I can see the little pearls of fertilizer. So these are being used, they're using a controlled release fertilizer. They're using an overhead mist irrigation. They've got these lovely trays. What's nice about these trays, girls?
They're completely spaced.
They're completely spaced. Plus, if you were to move a tray like this over to the retail operation and someone wanted to buy it, they could buy one flat. Boom, one set price. So I can price it by the pot, I can price it by the flat. Plus, I've already got the perfect spacing by laying it out like this. And again, innovative bench design, irrigation, again with PVC, coming up on risers with a spinner head. Space throughout the greenhouse to get overlap. A few wrap-up comments here. Because this is a wholesale nursery, I see over here that they have mulch and other things for sale in bulk. They have rocks and boulders. Again, this wholesale nursery is basically producing plant material to go to their retail operation as well as to go to the landscape industry. They have different types of rocks and gravel probably on display as well as for sale. So again, also to probably help block and keep the shade cloth down. Any last comments that you like about what are things that struck out from the wholesale and retail operation?
Well, one thing I just was going to mention was that I did notice that they seem to have a delivery type service also, which for homeowners I would think would be.
So they have a delivery for the homeowners?
Yes.
And I believe they also will deliver for large landscape projects.
Yes.
If you buy in larger quantities. Something that struck you about either one?
Well, it's very pretty, organized, and neat.
Pretty, organized, neat. Anything else?
Clean, very clean.
Very clean.
Yeah, lots of varieties. Everything.
How do you think they did about maximizing a bad location, making it good?
To me, in a sense, it's a bad location, but it's also a very good location because anybody driving along here, it's a very busy road. They're
Right.
going to come in. However, with all the electric, the wiring and everything, that makes it a bad location. I think they've done a very excellent job at camouflaging and obviously working well with their neighbors across the water. They apparently are not getting complaints of any kind, so they must work with their neighbors.
Part of the community.
Yes.
Very good. And they are you know, it is a busy road. There are power lines. They are close to the airport. But in a sense, because it's so busy, they have the public right here. They have a captive audience. They're right off of the Turnpike and Griffin, which is easy to get to. So anyone in South Florida could find them and get to them. I find it commendable that they have a web page, that they link the two sites together. Everything is well labeled. I like that I can figure out what's going on without even knowing their code system. I can kind of figure out what's going on in the nursery, whether I'm here or on the other side. So with that, we thank you for joining us, and we hope you've enjoyed just a slight glimpse into some of the things that you might see if you were to visit a wholesale nursery or a retail operation. Thanks, and we'll see you in another video.